welcome to another episode of How to Be a Great Player. Today we ask the question, are you a good leader, or do you actually need a leader in your role-playing group? Well, to answer the first question, we're going to look at three different aspects of just what is a leader, and hopefully that will give us the answers to the second question of do you actually need one? Now, not everybody who role-plays is going to gravitate towards the leader status of a group, and not every group is going to necessarily only have one leader, and these can cause conflict. However, if you have a good leader, I believe that you will have a fantastic role-playing experience. And it's my opinion that almost anyone can be a good leader simply by applying these next few steps when portraying a leader in the game. So what does a leader do? Well, a leader does three things in my opinion. 1, the leader makes decisions. 2, the leader steers the party. And 3, the leader takes responsibility. Now, none of those are particularly difficult things to do, but they do require you to step back a little bit and think a little bit more on the lines of ethics, morals, and the good of the many, as opposed to the good of the one, or in your case, the good of you. So let's look at making decisions. Now, I'm not going to go into how do we make decisions. What I am going to say though is, as a leader, how you make decisions fundamentally has to change from how you make decisions as just a regular character. As the leader character, as the one who's in charge of the group, when you make a decision on behalf of the group, it should never have been made without the consultation of the rest of the group. It's not hard to say, guys, what do you think? Do you want to go down the mine shaft? Do you want to go down the mine shaft? Do you want to go down the mine shaft? And once you've heard their opinions, you can then make an informed decision as a leader. The burden is on you, of course, to make that decision, and that we'll get to a little bit later on. But ultimately, how you make a decision as a leader is to listen to all of the answers that come from the rest of the party and to make sure that everyone has had their own opportunity to voice their reasons for or against a particular idea. Now, of course, sometimes as a leader, you need to make a spot decision where you don't have the opportunity of asking everyone for the consensus. Should we or should we not return an attack on this gigantic troll that's currently hitting one of our companions over there? That's not a decision that needs to be made. When that life or death situation is happening and the captain of the enemy starship is about to fire all weapons upon your star vessel, should you be deliberating with the rest of your crew as to whether you should raise shields or perhaps you should fly away? No. As the leader, you sometimes have to make on-the-spot decisions, and that means that your decision-making process needs to be shifted more towards what is in the best interests of the group rather than me as an individual. So oftentimes, especially in movies and in novels, you'll see that the leader makes the ultimate decision to sacrifice himself so that the rest of the group can continue going. Now, in role-playing, that experience doesn't need to be dissimilar. As a matter of fact, it would be an epic moment if you sacrificed yourself to keep the rest of your party alive. It would be a better leader who manages to work out a solution that keeps everybody alive. However, you do need to make on-the-spot decisions, and sometimes you need to do it without consulting. That means making a decision that is based on what's good for the group, not what's good for you. And then, of course, following through on that. And finally, you must always make decisions with the context in mind that what you decide now, you're going to have to make sure that you can follow through on that. There's no point in warning another character. If you do that, you're going to be cut off, and then not cutting them off. There needs to be some kind of repercussion. So when you make decisions, you need to be prepared to stand by them. This leads me to the next part of what it is to be a leader, steering the party. Now, to steer the party is not just a case of making a decision. You are the moral compass. You are the direction in which the party will move, not only on a physical level, but also on a spiritual level. Are you the kind of captain who will make a slave trade when it's illegal? Or perhaps you're going to lead your crew to slaughtering innocent young goblin females because their tribal village happens to be nearby and the local king has asked you to make an example of the local goblins. Perhaps you are a leader who's slightly corrupted and are making the wrong decisions. Perhaps you are a leader who is virtuous and who won't make the wrong decisions. Either way, remember you've got to fall back to the first role of a leader, which is to make decisions based on the best interests of the party. So you have to identify what the party is to begin with. But once you've done that, sometimes it falls on the leader to make sure that you stay true to the course. And of course, this is always in the context of, does it make the story better? And usually it will if the leader is saying, we cannot hand over those slaves. It would not be right. And then getting the opinions of everybody else and trying to persuade them to stay true to the moral compass. You also need to try and get the best deal for the party. Don't just sit back and let people take advantage of your people. You are the leader. That means you represent them. So when a deal is being struck, whether it's financial or simply some kind of exchange, and yes, you've sent forward your person who's got the highest persuasion or the highest appraisal or whatever skill system you're using, you still need to make sure they're getting a fair deal. And don't be afraid to step in and say, well, I know you've worked out a deal, but I think we can get a better one. Work with your people. Now, steering the party also requires you to make sure that you are assigning the right people to the right job. Now, as a leader, you are often going to be saying, oh, I need someone who's good at tracking. You take point. I need someone who's good at negotiations. You handle the negotiations. That doesn't mean that you simply step back and watch what's going on. You need to engage with them and try and help them and see if you can get the rest of the party to help them as well. So the role of the leader is to steer the party not only in the right moral or alignment course, but it's also to steer the party together, making sure that although one person might be assigned to a task, everyone else is knuckling in and getting involved. They're not just sitting back and maybe losing focus on the game as well. So you need to make sure that in steering the party, you're also not forcing people to do something that they don't want to do. Try and read whether they are actually interested in helping or whether they'd rather go and do their own thing. And the easiest way to do that is just to ask them. So leader requires you to ask a lot of questions before making your final decision. If we then look at the responsibility that the leader must shoulder, the leader is the one who's responsible for making decisions and sticking with them. But once you have made that decision, there is only one person who is, if you like, the master of that decision, and that's the leader. That's you. The rest of the party might have given you their opinions, but you are the one who's made that final call, and you must be prepared to shoulder the burden of making the wrong call, because as part of a leader, that is exactly what's going to happen. Repeatedly, you're going to make a decision based on what you think was a good idea at the time and watch things crash and burn horribly. But that's how you become a better leader. That's how you start to realize the strengths and weaknesses of your party. So it is imperative that you take on the responsibility and don't try and, oh, well, you didn't do your part, you didn't do your part, you didn't do your part. No, 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 no. As the leader, you failed. It becomes critical that the party gets to see that you will shoulder the burden of responsibility, but it also requires them to give you their opinions in a fairly calm manner. They must realize that they're going to be influencing your decision-making process, but you're the only one who's going to suffer if that plan doesn't work. You also need to realize that it is your responsibility to keep the party safe. So sometimes the party might be eager to do something, but you just feel there isn't enough information yet to go into that cellar in that old abandoned mansion. Maybe you want more information. That's your call. Remember, the responsibility sits with you. So if you feel you are endangering your party by making a decision, you need to really decide if it's worth it or not. And a lot of good role-playing will come from you deciding that it just isn't worth it. Although this is a role-playing game, the stakes are usually not very high. Well, you might have invested in your character, but if you haven't really invested in it, or if it's the first session that you're playing, no one's really going to stop themselves from running forward into the haunted house. Well, maybe it's time for your leader character to start exerting some of that influence that they are hopefully going to have and that they're going to build up over time. Ultimately, it always boils down to having respect. If you have respect for your fellow players' characters and you engage them frequently and don't just overrule them by bullying them or by forcing them to make a decision based on perhaps some kind of moral or social pressure, well, then you're a good leader. And please avoid using the game mechanics to make yourself leader. And by this I mean some systems have got things like command or leadership or persuasion or diplomacy, and those skills are supposed to allow you to influence the attitude of others towards your character. Don't go to the GM and say, I want to persuade my party to follow my plan. Can I make a diplomacy roll? Because all that's going to do is just turn the game into a bunch of numbers. If they resist your diplomacy roll, does that mean that they have to do the opposite? Does that mean that they're not going to do what you're going to do? A good leader, you need to be able to present your case. But in order to present your case, you need to have all of the opinions at hand so that you can weigh it up and say, well, all of my party members want to go ahead and do this. I think it's dangerous. Can I persuade them to get more information? Not to stop from going on it because they want to go on it. As the leader, you need to make sure that they're going to go on it in the safest way possible. Look at all of the good leaders that we have in every single series or book that you will read. The leaders take it on themselves to almost act as the shield against which all of the rest of the party will then be kept safe behind. In the analogy got confused. So the question then comes down, if you've got this leader who's looking out for the party from a moral perspective, from a safety perspective, from a security perspective, do you need one at your table? And if so, are you willing to step up and become the leader? Well, if your party is a fairly good communicative party, they sit around the table and they debate decisions and they move forward, then perhaps you don't need a leader because everybody is engaged and everyone is talking. But if you have a party of first-time players, or you have players who don't necessarily cooperate, well, maybe it is time to get a leader to come in there and beat them into shape to becoming a good working team. I think it also depends very much so on what type of game you're playing. Now, in a fantasy game, leader is not necessarily important, and sometimes perhaps the mage becomes the leader on a more magic-based adventure, or the warrior becomes the leader on a more physical-based adventure. In sci-fi, though, in futuristic settings, oftentimes a leader is needed, as there needs to be a front man. Now, the front man has to bear all of the responsibilities of a leader, so why not simply act like the leader? And I hope this has been useful in some way to shape your idea and understanding on what is a leader and what makes a good leader, and of course whether or not your party needs one. Until next time, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and happy playing.